Senator Spilka.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very happy to see so many of my colleagues joining us today on this important day for us to be making a statement for not only Massachusetts, but for our country, and letting people know where we stand, where we're concerned, where we're outraged, and where our thoughts, feelings, and our own principles are at this critical point in time. So I rise today because, frankly, my colleagues, I'm afraid we are entering a dark chapter of our nation's history. And we, as the Massachusetts State Senate, must bear witness to what we are seeing and what we are hearing. We must use our voices to push back against those in power who would reject the rule of law and due process for all of us in this country. Tomorrow, Donald Trump will have been in the office of the presidency for just 100 days. But we know that in such a short time, America is becoming unrecognizable. And I, for one, my friends, cannot sit idly by as we hear story after story, day after day, of residents being grabbed off the streets, kidnapped, and held with no access to justice. Again, making America a place that we here in Massachusetts and across our country hardly recognize anymore. And as someone who lost family members to the Holocaust, I do not say this lightly. But what we are experiencing in America today is starting to feel like Europe in the 1930s. And it's not just terrifying, it is enraging. This is not who we are. This is not the country that my family fled to. Not the country my father fought for. Many of you know my family's history, my family's story. But I believe under the circumstances, it's important to tell it again today in the context of what Trump is doing to target immigrants. And if the president gets his way, he may very well target citizens as well. My story begins with the story of a young man named Joseph in Russia, now it's Poland, in 1906. One day, he was protesting the oppressive policies of the Tsar with his best friend, only the very next day to find the body of that dear friend hanging in his village square. Joseph's friend had been killed for his religious and political beliefs, and unfortunately, Joseph's father knew his son was going to be next. So his son said his goodbye and sent his son to America to save his life. That day, this young man left everything he knew and everybody he loved, and that was my grandfather, Joseph Goldstein. And I am reminded now more than ever before that if my grandfather had not escaped, and if America had not welcomed him with open arms, I would not be here today. As a soldier during World War II, my father helped liberate the Nazi concentration camp known as Buchenwald. And what he experienced there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Like so many veterans of the time, he suffered from undiagnosed mental illness, which would probably today be diagnosed as PTSD. And this was in the years after returning home. My entire family suffered because of my father's illness, and he never got the opportunity to live out the rest of his years in peace, proud of his efforts to secure freedom around the world. So hear me when I say this, and I say this from the bottom of my heart. As the granddaughter of an immigrant fleeing political persecution, as a descendant of those who stayed in Europe and were subsequently murdered by the Nazis, and as the daughter who lost her beloved father to the horrors of the war, even though he came back and it happened years after he came back. I feel the danger of what is happening in America today deep in my bones. And I'm sure many of you do too. Like many of you, I watched in horror as the administration has kidnapped residents off of the streets, off of our streets, right here in Massachusetts. Rumeysa Öztürk, the 30-year-old Turkish citizen studying at Tufts University on an F1 student visa, was taken off the street by ICE agents while she was walking to dinner. Juan Francisco Mendez had his car window violently smashed in New Bedford as he and his wife were dragged from his car by ICE agents before Juan was seized and detained. Senua Petrova, a Russian-born Harvard-affiliated cancer researcher who lives in the United States legally, was detained at Logan Airport for a minor infraction and faces deportation back to Russia. And just this past weekend, WCVB News reported that masked ICE agents pulled over a van in Winthrop and took 2 people into custody. All of these people are here for a reason, maybe a reason similar to what drove my grandfather from his homeland many years ago. And rather than being welcomed by a country that values freedom and the rule of law above all else, they are being denied due process. An idea so foundational to who we are as a nation that John Adams himself defended the British soldiers, our adversaries. He defended the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre, which took place just down the street. He did that because he believed in due process so strongly that he built it into our Massachusetts Constitution, and it was brought into the United States Constitution. I don't need to tell you that this is not normal. It can never be allowed to be normal in the United States of America. I think we can all agree we don't want violent criminals on our streets. And the law should deal with criminals, whether they're born in this country or come here from someplace, any place else. But that is not what we are facing at this moment. What we are facing is a capricious, vengeful, and cruel administration that has co-opted federal law enforcement agents and openly defied our courts. The exact opposite of the law and order that Trump and his supporters have proclaimed to actually care about so much. And I, for one, feel I cannot remain silent. As this country that I love, that my father fought for, is forcefully remade into the very type of unchecked authoritarian regime that he actually fought against. I believe that we must stand up, we must stand together, and we must demand more from our elected representatives in Congress to act as the check on unfettered executive power that the Constitution demands of them, and then to pass meaningful immigration reform once this moment of extreme, very extreme danger has passed. As a reminder, and I know you all know this, but for those others that might be listening, as a reminder to all of us, Congress is meant to be the first among equals in the representative democracy envisioned by our Constitution, not the president, not the president. Just as in our Constitution here in Massachusetts, the U.S. Constitution sets out a strong system of checks and balances, with separation of powers playing a critically important role among our three branches of government. As James Madison said in 1788 in Federalist Paper number 47, quote, "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether it be one, a few, or many, and whether it be hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." While Congress is handing over its power to Trump, the courts still stand largely independent. And so we must use our voices to clearly object to the Trump administration defying the courts and insist that the president follow the rule of law. The good news is that most Americans seem to be waking up to the idea what is happening right now is fundamentally un-American. According to NBC News polls released just yesterday, 8 in 10 say legal due process for immigrants is either somewhat or very important. Other polls released this past weekend show the majority of Americans actually disagree with the Trump administration's handling of immigration, with more than 50% of respondents to a Washington Post Ipsos poll opposing to sending immigrants to El Salvador without due process, without a court hearing. We know that Trump is using the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to test his own limits. And I'm proud of the many Americans who have raised their voices in alarm about the lack of due process and actual flagrant disregard for the law his case has raised. It is absolutely outrageous that the President of the United States of America can be so callous about the rights of a man who has lost his freedom, to what Trump's own people, and I stress that, Trump's own people have admitted was an administrative error. Who are we? And what country is this? If we are to remain in America and have the America we know and love, we must do all we can to fight back against this 21st century tyranny. Because make no mistake, this regime has clearly demonstrated that it hates democracy as we know it and wishes to break the spine of America so it can bend us to their will. This is why we have been faced with a fire hose of law-defying, anti-democratic, and truly breathtakingly unbelievable actions during the first 100 days of his presidency. They want us broken, unsteady on our feet, overwhelmed, and scared, unsure of which actions to take to fight back. But I know this Senate, I know this legislature, this state, and this country. We are not defeated, and we all have a voice. We also all have power. The power invested by us, in us, by the Constitution, and by the people who voted for us. I admit I don't have all the answers. As a state legislature, we are limited what we can do to curb the worst impulses of a federal government determined to break laws, and a Congress that has voluntarily surrendered its power. But I'll be damned if I'm going to stay silent about what is happening to this country. And I hope all of you will join me in pointing out the fundamentally anti-democratic, anti-American actions of this presidency. This is about immigrants, yes, but it is also about so much more. We are in a battle for the soul of America, and we all here are the foot soldiers who will help determine whether this country remains the metaphorical shining city on a hill that we have all cherished, even with its imperfections. We know they exist, but it's existed and survived strong for 250 years. As Thomas Paine once proclaimed, quote, "Let a crown be placed thereon by which the world may know that so far as we approve a monarchy, that in America the law is king." The law is king. Not a person, not a group, not a president, the law. Not Donald Trump, the law. So let it be entered into the record today that I unequivocally object to the dissolution of due process and the rule of law in America, the country that I love. And as long as I am Senate President in Massachusetts, Massachusetts will resist this new tyranny, and the Senate will continue to embrace the principles and blueprint of our Response 2025 initiative to protect our residents, defend our values, and help lead this great nation past this moment of grave danger. So far, as part of Response 2025, the Senate has held a hearing about the threats of our leadership in climate change, filed a bill to strengthen protections for those seeking and providing health care, and steering and policy committee members have begun meeting with all of you to gather more of your ideas, what you're hearing, what your thoughts are, and there are other things in the works, but I welcome and look forward to all of you as we take actions to protect, defend, and lead. Today is part of this Response 2025, and I thank you all, and I welcome you for joining me today. Thank you.
I'll say from the rostrum that I endorse those comments from beginning to end.